mining from their factory in Britain were there ready. Brian Curry from Kenya and Charles Leonard, a South African, our mechanic and recorder, were there to help me sort out our loads and supplies for 4 full months. Curry brought Cheruyot, a Kips Nagis from Kenya, as tracker and gun bearer. Dabe, my interpreter, a bushman brought up in an Afrikaans oasis, was there, his wonderful old face creased in smiles. So was Jeremiah, a Barotsi, and my old safari cook, who bakes lovely bread in ant heaps. John Rautakal, a Bakwena from the southern Kalahari, came as my old camp help. John Ivanovic, born in the Kalahari, an Afrikaner sort of Alan Quatermain, and an old friend, was there waiting for me. Duncan Abraham, a Scot from Zululand, was our cameraman. Brian Curry and Charles Leonard checked and rechecked the gear. It was good to see how thoroughly and in what an experienced way they did their task. In between, they, Johnny and I, worked out a route carefully along the edges of the rivers and the swamps of the far northern Kalahari land. On the morning of September the 3rd, we were ready to move off. We put our last personal gear into the trucks and set course for the bush. It seemed to me a good omen that it was almost 100 years to the day since Livingstone first discovered the falls, and that we were following for some hundreds of miles in his gallant footsteps. I stopped by his statue to have a last look at the mile of water plunging into the narrow abyss, and to watch the cool spray hanging in the morning air. Then I drove straight past the falls into the bush, humming to myself one of the trekker tunes invented for these occasions by my trekker forebears. For some days then, we followed close along the course of the Zambezi and the Chobe rivers. It's a very old part of Africa, that, and extremely interesting. It's full of game of all kinds. And after so many months in the towns of Europe and of Africa, I felt that I had truly come home at last. Heavy sand from my previous expedition 2 years before, and watched deserted woodcutter huts flash by. Or we would go through a flock of extremely nervous baboons, making for the trees with their youngsters rumpling on their backs. Half a mile further on, we would see vultures wheeling in the sky. We'd stop our cars, get out, and see at once why the baboons were so nervous. A lion spoor, barely a minute old, was beside the track. At one place I followed the spoor 50 yards into the bush and found the vultures massing over what was left of a male baboon. We began to strike our first baobab trees, or cream of tartar trees as my ancestors called them, because from the fruit which grows on this tree they made a rough baking powder for their bread and scones. These trees are always a great joy to me, because I associate them in my mind with the little bushmen of my childhood. My grandfathers, a little old bushman of whom I've told you earlier on, had a story about these trees. They say when the great bushman spirit, the greatest of them all, Tung, was handing out plants and shrubs to all the human beings in the world to plant, he practically handed out all the plants when suddenly the evil one came along, in a great panic and a great rage. And the evil one said to the great spirit, Tung, he said, Kung, why are you always surprised that I behave so badly when you treat me so badly? Look what you've done. You've given all the spirits and all the human beings in the world trees to plant, and you've given me none. He put his case so well that the Great Spirit was extremely moved, and he handed out the last sapling he had to the evil one to plant. The evil one snatched it out of his hand, dashed off into the world, and planted it upside down. That was the baobab tree, and that's why it looks what it looks like. A week out from the falls, we had our first setback. We found our way to the northwest increasingly barred by water, 100 miles or more from where water normally is at that time of the year. The end of the day found us more and more ready for our rest. I was always the last to go to bed and the first up in the morning. When we had water enough, we all shaved as quickly as we could. That is, all of us except Leonard, because he was allowed to grow a beard as a sort of calendar to mark the march of time for us in the bush. We ate our food, one of the only 2 meals we allowed ourselves in the day, and then tried to get moving before the sun got too hot. Early the next morning, I got my party ready to explore the hills. Samu Chao came to explain that his father had gone off alone in the hills to pray, but had told him to guide us to the sacred water. I thought at times I saw a look of reproach on some of those wrinkled old bushman faces. Once, I left first. I think I left first because I felt rather upset. I was about to step into my car when I saw Daultri as I'd seen her in the beginning. Saw her again in a sort of child-mother role, running up to make certain I had water enough for the journey. And from there on, the track went out over the dunes and on beyond to the great world from which we'd come, and the world which knew them not. Duncan, who stayed to film the end, said that Mu and his bride stood there, staring after us until my car vanished from sight.